Daniel G, welcome to the All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on, man.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be on and glad to have the chat with you.
Thank you so much. So, first of all, I would just like to ask you something because I know you often probably get this question asked towards you several times. But how would you define yourself? How would you define your role that you play in the sports industry? Like, people would probably know about lawyers and how they go about technical things in different industries, but it's probably not heard of in the football industry on a larger scale. Let's say it's probably agents who play a much larger role in, let's say, newspapers or general media consumption. So how would you define your role?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool way to say my job is I'm a sports and football lawyer, and the I guess more boring, more technical role is to say I'm a contracts lawyer, I'm a regulations lawyer, I'm an intellectual properties lawyer, I'm a disputes lawyer, and I'm a reputation management lawyer. So take your pick and you tell me which one you prefer to hear more of.
So how did it start off for you? Like, were you interested in sports law from the get-go, or were you exploring different avenues in law and then you just decided to stick with sports law because, what was the reason behind it?
Well, it's a great one. It's a great one. So just like you or I, we're all sports fans and football fans really in the end, and that was just the thing that I enjoyed doing. And I distinctly remember at university thinking, and it didn't even really happen that naturally sometimes. It's like, well, how can I combine my studies with a little bit of, reading about sports and football cases really, because it was just more interesting to read about, or it was more, sorry.
No, that's okay. You can go on, yeah.
Yeah, it was more, sorry, just a call came in, but it was just more interesting to read about, to understand the industry. The knowledge stuck that little bit more, and sort of as a result, it just meant that I was interested in trying to delve more into the details. So, I remember I did EU law as a second year module at university, which I really enjoyed. Read all about Bosman, read all about different broadcasting cases where competition law sort of intertwined with sports and football and free movement cases. And from there, really, I went on to doing my dissertation third year on the changes to the FIFA transfer system back in 2000, 2001. And it hit a sort of light bulb moment where I thought I could do a sports law master's, and so I did that with a great academic guy, Mark James in Manchester, and I just had a bit more time, doing a few really interesting things. Where for my master's year, I spent a year reading three quite important cases. One was the Sky proposed takeover of Manchester United. Another was the very big Premier League cartel case back in 1999, I think it was. And the third case was to do with the listing of important sports and cultural events throughout Europe. And so I must have read, more or less every sports broadcasting competition law journal article there was for that year, which was just a beautiful year just for me to get my brain ticking over about the types of things of interest. Wrote a 80,000 word dissertation, and then had a bit of time at the end to write a couple of articles which got published in a few law journals, and that then sprung onto my law school to then starting my job, but also then doing some blogging and doing just some interesting writing on some interesting topics. Well, I thought they were interesting. It might not be for everybody.
And that's really interesting to hear. But just a particular question I have over there, that is it common for people who are in sports law, who are sports lawyers, to also specialize in other industries? Like, I think I've heard you speak about how when you were still learning about sports law, and as you mentioned, reading these case studies, reading these cases out there, you were still having your toes dipped into different industries, be it agriculture. Yep. So is it commonplace for other lawyers to just explore different industries in that sense?
Well, all I can say from my experience, and it's slightly different now because I think there are more opportunities for younger lawyers to probably specialise a bit earlier. There's 4 or 5 guys in our place that have all they've known really is sports law, but again, depending qualified sports law, it's still commercial law, intellectual property law, disputes, copyright matters, mediation, arbitration, whatever it might be, but within that specific facet of sport and football.
Yeah.
The truth was is that when I was doing my training and I was then at another law firm I did do some sports law work. I wasn't doing sports 100% at the time, which meant in a way at the time I would want to do more of that, but in a way it actually gave me a better, broader skill set, sector visibility, and enabled me to take things from different sectors and regulations and ideas into the sports and into the football world a little bit. So, I would encourage everyone. I'm in the midst of trying to write a sort of career book that maybe we can talk about a bit about now. But encourage everybody really to be not in too much of a hurry to specialize too early. You can definitely have the areas that you want to go into in the medium to long term, but I think ultimately you just got to play the long game a little bit more, which is great. You've got the passion, build it with knowledge base, build your network, improve your skill set in whichever area it might be, and you will always have then that focus of that particular industry you want to work in. And if it's a short-term thing that happens, or if you're building for the long term, if you keep without those processes, I think you're more likely to get to the end result.
So how important, because you touched upon it really, you put it very well there, like in the sense that, in my opinion at least, and I'm an outsider by all means over here, but I feel like when you're looking at sport, then most of the skills that you can actually pick up by just a general law degree, or even corporate law, or as you were talking about, media law in that sense, and then you can probably pick on that when you move into sports law. But it's much better almost to have this broader knowledge base of law, and then maybe connect it towards sports. So is that what your core idea is? Yeah.
Yes, to a degree. But if I look back now 5, 6 or 7 years, my core skill set and expertise was as a competition antitrust lawyer that did quite a lot of broadcasting sports work. That then, because of my competition antitrust work, I was dealing with European Community regulations on a day-to-day basis. My initial skill set was probably a little bit narrower towards competition law and everything that stems from competition broadcasting side, free movement, but then also on the regulatory side. So I actually needed to try and stretch my competency, was the truth. I'd done commercial law work, I needed to upskill on that. I'd done intellectual property work, I needed to upskill on that. I'd done dispute resolution, mediation, arbitration, dispute work, but I needed to upskill on that through experience, through going on courses, through reading, from working with barristers, through working with other people that were as skilled and certainly more skilled than me to sort of rely on their expertise and experience. And through that, because in a way, my concern was, as a sports or football lawyer, I can't just be a sports regulatory lawyer. It's too narrow. So how do I build on regulatory, broadcasting, sort of content, commercial, IP, dispute resolution, disciplinary, the wider regulatory piece, reputation management. So in a way, I'm covering an awful lot of bases, which started off as quite a narrow core.
Right. So you touched upon this in some sense briefly right now, that you were really working on this book. For just fans and people alike who'd be intrigued into how one can actually just form a career in the sports industry, really. So what do you think are the building blocks in doing something in the sports industry? And and I think you touch upon this briefly in Done Deal as well, because I haven't read it. It's on my reading list for sure, but I've heard good reviews about it, and I've heard you talk about it as well.
Thank you. So the book that I'm sort of in the middle of writing is sort of half based on my YouTube channel series of building a career in sport. But what I wanted to try and do was make it even a little bit broader than that, if it's the entertainment or TV space as well, because a lot of people's passions cross the sort of entertainment sphere. If it's fashion, if it's TV, if it's film, if it's influencer marketing, if it's YouTube stuff, if it's sport or whatever else people's passion points are more likely to be. And I wanted to sort of make it a little bit more inclusive than just how do you get into the world of football is the truth.
Yeah.
But there are a number of quite specific behavioural processes in a way that I've learned in different ways, which have definitely helped. So, you know, three things that I've thought quite deeply about, but at least I've had to do quite a lot of research when thinking about it. Query whether I'm a deep thinker is a different question altogether, but the answer is sort of threefold. The first is not to think about the short term, i.e. not to think about the short term in terms of, if I can't get a job in my chosen insert career industry, then I'm not cut out for it. Because I actually want that reverse mindset to take shape, which is, if, for example, you're willing to go for the long haul, that you're willing to invest in yourself, usually through knowledge building, and we can talk about that in a second, and building a network, what you eventually manage to do is to build up a good knowledge base about your chosen industry, not just like the cool things that are going on, if it's in football, like what the scores are, or what is fashion, what's the latest trend, but the real in-depth understanding of what companies are doing, what individuals are doing, how things connect, interesting topical issues that allow you to connect more deeply with the subject matter. And if you then connect more deeply with the subject matter, you're more likely, I think, to impress and have, you know, good conversations with people inside and outside of the industry. And by doing that, you stop playing a finite game. There's a great book from Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game.
Yeah.
And you start playing an infinite game, which is, you're not stuck in your static world of a yes or no or along the same path. You're in a dynamic world of, by making all of these cool small changes, it changes your path and it changes your perception. It changes the way that you can talk and speak and liaise with people and talk with sense and cognizance about a particular area, industry. So, and what that means is that you don't put too much pressure on yourself at the same time to be like, I don't get a job now, then I'm just going to have to, you know, put all my commitments to one side and do something, you know, less likely to make me, you know, more happy or passionate. So the first thing is almost like, actually think short term and long term in the same way. Think short term of like, build your knowledge base, think about all these different processes, build your networks in different ways, but only think long term in terms of, if you're in it for the long haul, you won't mind putting in the short term, and also without putting too much pressure on yourself. And then the second thing, very briefly, is I think people also need to reverse the narrative in terms of what they ask of people as well. I think it's really important that everyone generally tries as much as they can be within reason to be a little bit more selfless. How can other people help the other? I think it's a really important narrative that a lot of people do consider, but don't necessarily act on as much. So, for example, I'll try and give you a couple of examples. I think that when, for example, someone is asking for work experience, or you're making a favor request of somebody, a lot of the time, the easy answer for that person that is going to have to give the request is either not to answer or say thanks but no thanks. And what sometimes I think you've got to do is pivot the conversation to almost be like, to think a little bit more deeply about what that person needs, but maybe doesn't realize they need. And then offer value because you thought deeply about the request that you're making. So it doesn't become, please can I have work experience? It can be, okay, I want to be a football agent. It can be, I know that maybe you need help in delivering boots to somebody, or the dry cleaning's got to be picked up, or we need to transport this to go to there, or whatever else it might be. It's solving a problem, being proactive and thinking about a solution. And that, I think, is a really important element to try and getting people towards this whole, it's about me, but it's about you, or it's about you, and I'm going to do everything I can to be able to help you to show that actually I've got good competency, I'm trustworthy, reliable, I can do the job, actually I'm technically proficient, and I can be impressive. And even if it doesn't work out for you at that particular time, either they might tell someone they know, either that provides good experience for your CV, and you're able to demonstrate that proactivity, and you keep on timing that, you keep going in particular ways. That for me is quite a positive, more outward-facing perspective rather than staying inward and just thinking, what can other people do for me?
Right. There are several things to unpick here because you mentioned quite a lot there, even if it just briefly mentioned 3 points. But just starting off, I had this particular thing that came up to me, and you said that with your podcast as well, and I'd really recommend the listeners to tune into that because you have these conversations with people not only from law, but it's actually people from different industries within sport and how they are actually trying to form a career in that sense. So there are journalists on, there are people, as you mentioned, doing football fashion and aspects like that. So what I would say is that from the outside, one may look at as a football fan and say that, oh, look at their transfer fee. That's so glorious to be a football agent and work with the player. But when you actually start understanding the roles of a football agent or a football lawyer in that sense, it may not look as glamorous as it obviously looks from the outside. So do you feel that there is benefit in, let's say, even if I have this preconceived notion that, okay, I want to be a football agent, but when you actually start exploring different things like journalism or fashion for that sense, you might actually enjoy that more and feel that maybe this is what I'm cut out for?
Well, I think there's two things there as well as the truth, which is the first more general concept is, the more that you explore and the more that you adventure, the more that you pick up on your passion points to work out whether you've got a hook and you want to explore and understand things further. I think the second really important thing is a lot of people, I think, want to work in sport without necessarily understanding what their core skill set could actually be.
Yeah.
I sometimes I'll be like, I want to be in sport, and I don't mind if it's in marketing, in social media, if it's in brand, if it's in agency. And in a way, that approach feels a little bit backwards. I'm almost thinking, what is your value add? What is your skill set? What can you bring to the table? And as a result, how can that potentially transferable into the types of jobs that are available in sports? So to give you an example, let's just say you're working for a really cool pharmaceutical brand in their marketing and social media department.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's really quite an interesting short-term beneficial approach to be able to understand how a brand is trying to communicate B2C, how it's trying to put particular messages out, how it's communicating a particular ethos, because then ultimately what that enables you to do is to be able to transfer that marketing skill, capability, understanding, intuitive knowledge into the sports sector if there are equally transferable skills. So I'm almost like find the core area and pivot it into sport in due course, rather than I want to be sport but I don't know what my core area potentially is.
Right. So something I kind of wanted to pick out was so you use several mediums out there and really well. So you have a YouTube channel out there, you have a podcast, and you write blogs as well. So like the point I'm trying to put forward here is that when you're trying to get your idea across, do you try to alter it, let's say, with these different platforms? So if it's Twitter, so you try to put a sort of message out there which is obviously going to be different to when you actually putting out a podcast or even a YouTube video. So, and even on an educational side of point of view, so what's your idea there? Like, how would you try to impart education, be it in a football law perspective or just in trying to work things out in the football industry perspective?
I'm just trying to help people. I think maybe that's and educate people. I think that's my first underlying point.
Yeah.
And that there are different mediums to do that in different ways. But I think it's really just the beauty of it all is that technology gives me, the relative technological dinosaur to a degree, the ability to be able to communicate on, not on mass scale, but on the ability to be able to connect with one other person than I otherwise would have been able to do. And in a way, that started from my girlfriend, now wife, Holly, telling me there's no point writing 7,000 word law will read because it's behind a paywall, to be like, write, easily digestible, interesting, accessible content on your blog and start it from there. In a way, that blog methodology or mechanism of make it easily accessible and people to be able to read and do, that actually then took me into Twitter, that took me into Instagram, it took me into YouTube, it took me into podcasts, it's taken me in various different directions, because ultimately it's just another different form of content. It's written versus spoken versus visual versus a combination of all three, and then you can just cross network all of those different possibilities together. So I know that, you know, I'm on TikTok, I'm not dancing, and, you know, effectively rejigging content in a slightly different way to a different audience, because I know, you know, a Facebook audience is very different to a TikTok audience, is different to a Twitter audience, is different to a, you know, a blog reading audience, is different to a book audience, for example. So my view is to try and collectively reach as many people in different ways depending on their consumption habits.
Daniel, this has been great. I know you don't have a lot of time for me today, but just before you leave me, can you talk to me a little bit about your brand?
We got 5 minutes, if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I was just wanted to ask you about your brand. So I've been recently looking on your Twitter posts and several other social medias as you're putting forward. So what is 13 basically? Just tell me about it.
Yeah. So 13 has always been sort of my family's lucky number. I know it's quite unlucky for some, but I quite sort of half like the fact that not everybody enjoys it. So there's never usually 13th rows, there's never usually 13th floors, there's never usually 13th, you know, rooms and all. But yeah, in my religion, 13 is lucky number. My grandmother was born on the 13th. It's my mum's lucky number for things. I always wore 13 as a football shirt, for example, which I've always really enjoyed. And it almost then becomes a little bit, you know, out of the ordinary. It's almost like, why does someone want to use 13 as the sort of number? So, yeah, when Mum was ill with cancer, which thank goodness she's, you know, in recovery and everything is good now. Her oncologist, Dr. John Krell, was fantastic with her. He's got lots of different cancer research programs going on. And my idea was, instead of running a marathon, which I'm not sure I'll be able to do, which I started a t-shirt brand. And after a bit of research with, you know, looking at Printful and Shopify and different ideas, the plan was then just to do a t-shirt design and go from there. And actually, when I realized that it was a bit more straightforward than I thought after doing a bit of research, then I just sort of expanded the brand a little bit to a few more things. So it basically means that, and all my friends take the mick out to me for it, but you know, I've become a walking advertising campaign for my own brand at the weekends with my hat and my hoodies and my and socks and everything else. So I try not to wear. My rule is not to wear more than 2 pieces of 13 clothing anyway. That's the plan there.
That's great. That's great. Is there anything you'd like to plug? I definitely recommend people to go check out your book Done Deal. But when's your next book going to be out? Like, is there any sneak peek on that? And yeah, where people can find you and your work?
I have an exclusive here. That the exclusive is I don't know just yet. But I'm hoping because I haven't taken much holiday time this year at all. So the idea is maybe just to take a little bit of time in December, try and finish as much as possible and then decide whether I'm going to self-publish it or you know, pitch it to a couple of publishers, including Bloomsbury, who I worked with on Done Deal before. And then the idea also is I'm interviewing maybe between 20 and 30 people for the book as well. And hopefully then what the aim is then to publish all of that content on podcasts and on YouTube to be able to demonstrate their stories and just input their ideas of, you know, how people started off in the industry, what sacrifices they made, what mistakes they made, how did they go about doing things in particular ways, you know, were there dead ends, did stuff not work out, all of the 360 view of things, rather than people seeing, you know, in a way the end result of me, I'm a football lawyer, look how great it is. And I agree, it's fantastic, but the part of the book is to unsugarcoat things, which is the way that I've got here is not just by, you know, pure luck or by just being in the right place at the right time. It's taking quite a lot of effort and hard work, and I want to just show people a little bit behind the scenes from me and a lot of other people in the same boat, to almost give confidence and comfort that if you do a lot of these important things and lay those pretty solid foundations, that anything's possible.
That's great, man. Thanks for having this chat. I hope we can have this sometime again in the future. Thanks for coming on, Dan. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the All Walks of Life podcast. I know this was sort of shorter than my usual ones, But I hope to have Daniel on back again in the future. He's just an interesting person to pick, whose brain to pick, really. I mean, he has so much knowledge uh, in the sports law, and even how to make a career in the sports industry as a whole, really. So yeah, I found it a really intriguing chat in that sense. If you do like the work I'm trying to do here, do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, links to which you can find down below, or just following me on my social media handles, really. You can follow me on Twitter at Agarwal Ishan underscore. You can follow me on Instagram at Ishan Agarwal underscore. And yeah, we can take it from there, really. Thanks again for listening to the podcast, and see you again in the next one.